Ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon and good morning to Michael over in Austria, and good afternoon everybody in Korea. It is my really great pleasure and honor to have Dr. Michael Leiterer as a special speaker for our special lecture series. Michael Leiterer was formerly EU's ambassador to Korea for 3 to 4 years. He returned home, and then he got academic positions as well as some advisory roles in a few very interesting and very important academic institutions, including University of Innsbruck and Brussels School of Governance in Belgium, as well as also he's active in Geneva School of International Studies. And basically, Dr. Michael Leiterer has been career diplomat from Austria, and also he was a trade negotiator. And he was one of the architects of ASEM, Asia-Europe meeting. And he and me were working from that time when ASEM was launched. We have met in a few academic conferences and also some official meetings as well. And we developed our friendship, and we have become not only good colleagues, but also very close friends. So it's my really great pleasure to have him as a special speaker. Recently, he co-authored a book, and this co-authored book is very relevant and very important for Korean Peninsula. So I wanted to have him as a special speaker. I see Professor Lee Jae-seung, Dean of GSIS and DIS. So why don't you have some short words?
Thank you very much, Professor Park. And well, I still think you are here in Seoul. And it's not just myself, but a number of your friends in Seoul may think in that way. And yesterday there was Home's retreat. The EU embassy arranged the Pan-European retreat, well, ambassadors retreat session in Kaesong. So I got a chance to deliver. Well, this probably the very similar topic in the Pacific, South Korea's Indo-Pacific issue to a number of European ambassadors. So I'm really now I'm really hoping that I could have a chance to listen to your lecture first and then deliver my lecture there. But it was well done, and it was nice communication. Indeed, this is a very important moment both for the European Union and South Korea to redefine their role in this region, and geopolitics and geoeconomics in the region is changing. So I think this will be a very challenging topic for both of us in the forthcoming years. And for that, we will greatly appreciate your insight on this issue. And well, we'll be glad to have you in many forthcoming occasions, either at the university level or academic level. So once again, thank you very much for joining and accepting this wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Michael Leiterer will talk about 30 to 40 minutes, and this will be followed by Q&A session of about 20 minutes, right? So if those who have any questions, please reserve them to the end of his talk. So let us start. Michael, could you start?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Yeah, Professor Lee, it's true. Sometimes I also feel I have only partially left Korea. So the body left, but the mind is there, and and these webinars have a permanent possibility to send the minds across long distances. But I must say, after more than a year of this kind of interaction, I'm really looking forward to real interaction, because it is of a different quality and nature. It's also my honor to be invited again in this series in cooperation with Kiev and my friends there. And I thought it was a nice gesture of Professor Park to take up the book which we have recently published, to give a talk about the Indo-Pacific and its relevance for Korea. So I'll try to go back to my what I have already had here. Okay. So I want to give a short introduction, perhaps first what we are talking about, the Indo-Pacific. Is there really everything new? Because sometimes you get the impression nowadays the Indo-Pacific is the latest the latest innovation on Earth. Well, I have some doubts about it. I will talk about that. I will touch upon the interest of the European Union, cooperation partners. Can the EU play a lead? And what is the value added the European Union can bring? And then, but concentrate basically on the last issue, what EU and Korea could do in that respect. Well, the Indo-Pacific is as a region is of course huge, and it's very interesting to see that we have changed basically names a little bit. We have talked first about Asia. Then there was a tendency to say, well, Asia is too big. We have to talk about East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia. Then we added suddenly the Asia Pacific. So that was an enlargement, and Australia and the Pacific Islands and the Pacific Island Forum moved into the center. Not enough. South Asia was a little bit lower on the radar. Therefore, we have now the Indo-Pacific. But somehow we are talking about the same area with different names. And what I was a little bit surprised not to hear a criticism I had heard when I was working on different Asia strategies within the European Commission, that the Indo-Pacific is too large an area that you can have one single strategy. But we will see how that will play out. Well, is it an important area? Well, of course, the Indo-Pacific. This is taken from the EES fact sheet. You see, the Indo-Pacific produces 60% of global GDP, contributes 2/3 to growth, to global growth. It is home of 2.4 billion new middle-class members, and they will all come from that region, which means there will be economic demand. The largest economies are there. They have listed here the three largest, but the next one would be Korea. It is a highly digitalized and technology-prone area, specifically Korea. We will come to that. And it is central to the global value chains, international trade and investment flows. Well, we see that right now when we see problems in the international trade and traffic, when some of the big container ports are blocked then we are slowing down production in Europe. It's not only, but especially in the area of the car industry, where many European factories have come to a halt because there are not enough semiconductors around. But it's not only a one-sided effect. The European Union is top investor, like in Korea, top development assistance provider, and one of the largest trading partners of each and every country in the region. It just depends whether the European Union is number 1, 2, 3, or 4. So it is important. Well, I put the question: is everything new? Has the European Union suddenly discovered the Indo-Pacific? Well, the answer clearly is no. And you can see on this chart the EU strategies and guidelines, which I have mentioned, and were started back in 1994. The European Union is the longest dialogue partner of ASEAN. It will be 45 years next year. Professor Park mentioned the ASEAN meeting, which was set up between the European Union and ASEAN in 96. The European Union has concluded 5 of the 11 strategic partnerships with Asian countries. The latest was ASEAN, which was added in December of 2020. The EU made the connectivity strategy, and that will be now further enlarged and will be the global gateway. And it is clearer and clearer becoming an answer to the Belt and Road Initiative of China. In 2016, the European Union published the global strategy, and there it was spelled out that the security of Europe and Asia is intertwined. So depending on each other. In doing further work, enhancing security cooperation in and with Asia was the policy paper of 2018, where Korea was chosen for a pilot project on cyber security. Well, then came in 2019 the famous China Strategic Outlook, where the European Union created a triptych that China can be a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival, which was taken over also by the United States as a classification, and we have to work within that framework. The 2020 Comprehensive Agreement on Investment with China also made a lot of waves at the time, because it was just signed before the Biden administration came to power, but it was the end point of 8 years of negotiations, so it was not really timed to be in parallel with the Biden administration. But as the European Union was putting sanctions on China for human rights, China put sanctions on members of the European Parliament. And as the European Parliament would have to ratify this comprehensive agreement on investment, it will certainly not do it as long as members of the European Parliament are sanctioned by China. And now we come to the 2021, the Indo-Pacific strategy. In April, we had council conclusions to that effect, and a half a year later, in September, we had this communication, which is the core we are talking about. The areas of cooperation, and I will show you different ones now, is you see a high convergence of ideas. Ocean governance, important, research technology, connectivity, again, health after the pandemic, strengthening of regional organizations within the Indo-Pacific, but also globally, to underline the importance of multilateralism. Multilateralism is the principle which is protecting the weaker one, the smaller one, also middle powers like Korea, therefore important to work on that. And of course, making sure that the global challenges and global commons such as climate change are taken care of. Well, if you look at what the European Union had proposed a little bit earlier in the connectivity strategy, then you see a lot of overlap, and the same ideas are coming back again. Connectivity in the sense of transport, energy, digital, and the human dimension. So the ideas which were already there have also been imported to a large extent in the Indo-Pacific strategy. Well, as Korea was also present at the last G7 meeting in the UK, there was a formal meeting between the two presidents of the European Union, Council President Michel and Commission President von der Leyen, with President Moon Jae-in, and efforts are underway now to also to have a formal summit again in person in Korea. Right now, there seems to be a slight problem of agendas. I think very soon President von der Leyen will meet President Moon Jae-in in Rome, and President Michel will come to Seoul. So with Photoshop, you have to put them together and then makes it a common meeting. But I think it's a sign of appreciation. Now, what we can also add to our discussion in the bilateral sense is the EU-Korea strategic partnership, which last year had the 10th anniversary, and many of the ideas in connectivity, but also in the Indo-Pacific strategy are laid down. Korea and the European Union have a values-based approach across the board. The international liberal order, functioning WTO, multilateralism, respect for human rights, and on top of all that, we have 3 agreements which link the European Union and Korea: the political framework agreement, the free trade, and the security cooperation agreement. So I think we have a very intense network on which to work. And if you again look at the main issues covered by the strategic partnership, we see old friends: cybercrime, disaster management, energy, climate change, aging population in the people-to-people dimension come back. So what we do see is that the 7 priorities which are defined in the Indo-Pacific strategy: sustainability and inclusive prosperity, green transition, ocean governance, as you see, I have listed them here, fit very well with the already existing framework the European Union and Korea have. The Indo-Pacific connectivity partnership, I think this is something which could bring all these different strands, which I have tried to explain to you together. It is a project which I'm strongly proposing is that the European Union is as a champion of multilateralism, making an effort within the Indo-Pacific to bring different existing partnerships together, link them up, and that brings us to what is also called a network diplomacy. There are not too many friends of multilateralism, as we know. We have a certain tendency to bilateralism, to minilateralism. We have too much influence of nationalism. We have populist approaches, and therefore standing up for multilateralism and network building, I think, is important, and there the Indo-Pacific connectivity scheme could play a role in establishing different networks horizontally, but also vertically, depending on the nature of cooperation. I think if one were to have such a network, then the sum would be more than the individual elements. There's just a sketchy beginning now. We have connectivity partnerships between the European Union and Japan and India. They have already started. Discussions with Korea are underway, but I would propose very strongly to have this connectivity on the level of the Indo-Pacific. That could cover the major areas of transport, digital energy, people-to-people exchanges, where one can already draw on existing work. If you look at digital, the European Union and Korea share the interest in an open and secure cyberspace. That was already discussed at the G20. So you can link back to G20, but also to G7 as part of the network diplomacy I'm advocating. Transport, interconnectivity of logistic corridors. I have mentioned that this is posing one of the major problems which we see right now, and we also have to make sure that we have more sustainability in the whole transport sector. The European Union has also concluded last year an open skies agreement with ASEAN as part of transport, which could also be enlarged and multilateralized, because we all know that the air traffic, despite the pandemic, and once we are over the pandemic, will increase, and at the same time, it has to be greened. There's air travel, aviation is one of the areas where green transition is requested very strongly, because this has been left out a little bit in the endeavors as applies to ocean shipping. Ocean going vessels produce more CO2 than cars, by the way, and this is a long-term or mid-term effort, because ocean-going vessels normally have a lifespan of 30 to 50 years. So it's very difficult to make a change tomorrow, but you have to plan ahead. And that this has become a major challenge. The same in the whole area of hydrogen and fuel cells, where Korea is strong. But one also has to see how to build stronger LNG as an intermediary step, and how to get to a low carbon energy system in general, and getting out of coal not only domestically but also internationally. In the people-to-people dimension, well, that can be, I think, a further increase. I'm happy to talk also to Jean Monnet chairs, but I had always hoped to add a few, because Korea is big enough to have additional ones, but they are important for academic and scientific exchange. What is a little bit lacking, and therefore I put it here, is professional and vocational exchanges. Not everybody is an academic, but we also need good vocational training, and we also need exchanges in that area. Language studies, Korea language studies, well, thanks to Korean culture, has got another boost. I think even Squid Games might contribute to raising interest in Korean language studies. Well, the European Union and Korea can also do that from a position of strength economically. You see here the main trading partners of the European Union. and there Korea plays an important role. We had to take out the United Kingdom, as you can see, but it is an important partner amongst the first 10, and that gives the European Union and Korea also the responsibility to act as responsible players in the international trade policy. And trade policy is very much challenged. I have just listed here the regional trade agreements, their fate. If you look at the TPP, which was one of the major ideas and goals of the pivot point 1, as I would call it, of President Obama. He wanted to write the rules for global trade. Then we had President Trump, who found that was a horrible deal. And now President Biden is trying to come back with his pivot point 2, but he has a stronger focus on security. And I have put here Coras, and I could also have added the Quad. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which used to be a sort of a counterweight with strongly influenced by China, is still there, but we also have now efforts by China to join in the CPTPP and the same with Taiwan, which will give further political fire to these two FTAs. But what is important from the point of view of policy, one has to make sure that regional trade agreements, and you have to add to all those the bilateral free trade agreements, which are concluded not only by the European Union, but also by Korea and other players, that they are mutually supportive and they don't create closed cycles or circles. A very important instrument in free trade agreements are the rules of origin, because the rules of origin define which products, but also services, are covered by an agreement. And if they are not in line with international rules of the WTO, it can easily be that instead of more free trade, you have less free trade because of the rules of origins, which are not competitive amongst the different free trade agreements. So it's not always free trade when it is written free trade on the label. So one has to be very careful there and strengthen the WTO. You can find it also in the trade policy review of the European Commission, which was done in February of this year. That was it's two-pronged. The annex is reforming the WTO, but I'm quite happy that the Indo-Pacific strategy adds a lot of importance to trade in the Indo-Pacific area, because the February policy review was rather weak on Asia. So there, the Indo-Pacific strategy is a sort of corrective, underlining the importance and what should be done in the Indo-Pacific to make sure that there is trade. Well, the general conclusions, I think I have already hinted at what needs to be done. This is the Indo-Pacific connectivity network, which I have tried to explain. One should also make use of the ASEM again, because ASEM has proposed and worked on a sustainable connectivity definition, so that we are talking about the same issues. it is an area, I think, where the European Union can bring its experience and credibility, because we don't know everything, we cannot do everything, so one has to choose also priorities where you can work with credibility. And it is important to work on this resilient production and value chains, semiconductors I have mentioned, and also to make sure that we have cooperation on these emerging technologies, which I have listed. That brings me now specifically to Korea. And I think there is a sort of meeting of minds, because Korea seeks to diversify its relations economically, politically, and to increase its resilience. Too much dependence on China is not in the interest of Korea, and that has been shown if I just remind ourselves of the SARS situation. So, strong influence of China as the #1 trading partner, and then you have to figure out how to square the circle, because the US will be the #1 security provider. Now, this is where the European Union, I think, can kick in with its specific approach, a value-based approach. The goal is to provide global commons like fighting climate change, a rule-based trading system, a sustainable ocean governance, maintaining an edge in research and development of emerging technologies. And if we are able to put that together, that will strengthen the position of Korea, but it will in turn also strengthen the position of the European Union as a player in the region. Now, the specific recommendations, you find them developed and also in the paper. But let me just give you a few thoughts about these ones. Conclude a bilateral EU-South Korea connectivity partnership. Step 1, because there's the connectivity strategy, but then not only in the sense of physical infrastructure, but also including connectivity in the larger sense, and then extend it to an Indo-Pacific partnership as part of a network approach. Further, set up a regular EU-South Korea health cooperation dialogue. I think that's something which came back to our minds because of the pandemic. However, if you look back to 2010, when the political framework agreement was concluded, so 12 years ago, health dialogue was already there, but it was kept dormant. And I think the wake-up call of the pandemic was there, and I think it's also a wake-up call for all of us to look a little bit more closely on what we already have on the books, because if we implement what we have in the books, we would have been better prepared for the pandemic, because it was already identified as a major issue for cooperation between the European Union and Korea. Now, research and development in health related issues, I think, has been confirmed as effective in fighting the pandemic. We all have admiration for scientists who produced vaccines within a relatively short time. But this is an area where we should not stop now thinking that the pandemic might be over in a few months' time. I think that would be unwise policy and a disaster, because the recurrence of pandemics is very likely. And we have just forgotten that we had pandemics in the Middle Ages. We had the pandemic at the beginning of the 20th century. We have ongoing pandemics in Africa, Ebola. And I think what was new with this pandemic, that it was hitting also industrialized developing countries. And I think that makes that made an impact on us. But we should not think that we can get rid of pandemics if we only look at the industrialized world. Recently, a few weeks ago only, there was the announcement that the malaria vaccine has been developed. I think that's also a major breakthrough, because malaria is one of the dominant diseases in the developing world. So I think there, in working for global commons, Korea and the European Union have a lot to contribute, and to bring the experience and the technology together. Strengthening cooperation in cybersecurity and cyber resilience and related technologies is very important. The specific and outstanding role of Korea is that it is the most connected country in the world. That's good. That's nice. That gives a lot of possibilities, but it also creates a lot of risks. Korea is the fifth country in the world which is targeted by cyber attacks. So that's not something which is good, but the more connected you are, the more you depend on cyber, the more vulnerable you become. So the infrastructure, or the critical infrastructure as it is called, is increasing basically by the day. The more connected you come, the more vulnerable you become, because you increase your critical infrastructure. And I think this is an area where both countries can work together, and where from the foreign policy point of view, Korea has an interest to join a multilateral approach. When the European Union was able to identify where a cyber attack was coming from, like China, like North Korea, sanctions were imposed. And that's something Korea would be very hesitant to do alone. If Korea identifies that a cyber attack would come from China, then it would be very reluctant to act alone. So this is I think a very good example for multilateralism, that joint action could also increase resilience. And that's where we can build already on ongoing cooperation. The Korea joined GDPR, the protection, the personal data protection. So when you go to websites and you have to confirm that you allow cookies and that you have read everything, which you never read because it's too long and you don't understand everything. Well, this is thanks to GDPR. It's the personal data protection, and that should also be extended to industrial use. And of course, we have the important fight against misinformation, and which is a threat, which can also be a threat for democracy and political systems if we have interference in elections. And that's not theory, that's also something which has happened already. So we have also an interest from the value-based policy point of view to have more cooperation. ASEAN, well, I put that down also specifically because Korea and the European Union, we agree on ASEAN centrality in organizing or trying to organize the region. Well, this is a concept where we have to make sure that it is not only lip service. We have seen developments in the past that, in addition to the ASEAN Regional Forum ARF, the East Asia Summit was developed. Then the meeting of the ADM Plus, the meeting of the foreign ministers. That had its high time when President Obama was very interested and graced the meetings with his presence. again, President Trump did not grace the meeting with his presence, and it became a little bit less important. But now we see all kinds of minilateralism working, like the Quad, where Asean Centrality does not play a role, in Coras, where Asean Centrality doesn't play a role. So if we want to maintain this multilateral approach, I think it would be good for Korea and the European Union to work together in strengthening ASEAN institutions as an institution and to help them in capacity building. This is, of course, also a wake-up call directed at ASEAN. ASEAN is challenged right now with overcoming the crisis in Myanmar. ASEAN is negotiating for a long time with China about the code of conduct in the South China Sea. ASEAN is trying to implement an ASEAN market. So a lot of challenges, but I think we have to make sure that we strengthen ASEAN in order to contribute to multilateralism and maintain something from the liberal international order. Well, the interest of the European Union and Korea in the maritime domain, I think, is clear. It's maritime connections in sense of transport, but it is also fisheries, and it is the protection of the oceans. The European Union has developed an ocean strategy and an action plan, and I know that there is a lot of meeting of the minds, but again, we have to make that step from meeting of the minds to the meeting of the hands, in the sense of doing more in order to preserve the maritime domain. I have already referred several times now to the importance of international trade policy, the WTO, the strengthening of the global governance in that respect. We have an important FTA concluded between the European Union and Korea, but it's already more than 10 years old now, and that means it needs modernization. We have to think about investment. We have to think about e-commerce. We have to correct some mistakes, and I think this is something which would also give a boost to the rules-based trade if we show that we take this global governance to a higher level. It is also important for rules setting, because a free trade agreement or economic partnership agreement, as we say nowadays, is not just about tariffs of trade, but it is very much also about norm setting, standard setting. To the free trade agreement between the European Union and Korea also had a sustainability chapter, and that is where the rules were written down that Korea should join the core ILO conventions, and that caused some frictions for some times, but we have overcome them now, and Korea, based also on this FTA, is or has signed up to these outstanding ILO conventions. So you see, it is an important factor. Also, in environmental issues play a role. There was one question already communicated to me before I started the talk. Has the European Union changed its trade policy? Well, over the years, yes. At the beginning, the European Union was WTO only, and hardly any free trade agreements. But when all the other countries started to do less in the WTO and more free trade agreements, the European Union also entered into free trade agreements, like with Korea and other countries. But as a champion of multilateralism, WTO remains very high on the agenda, and I think WTO came also back to the minds of Korea when the former trade minister tried to become the director general of the WTO. So I think there's a high awareness, and we should work on that. Strengthening multilateralism, I have mentioned now several times. The same goes for rule of law in international politics. That has to be applied across the board. And it's very important also to find a solution on the Korean Peninsula. There has to be trust in rules and in agreements, because otherwise, how will you be able to persuade other partners to sign an agreement with you if the partner cannot be sure that the rules and treaties are respected? Last but not least, the Paris goals. We are only a few days away from the COP26 in Glasgow. There, Korea has come now on board with also a Green Deal, which was, I think, inspired by the Green Deal of the European Union, working for a circular economy, decarbonizing the economy. And this would be of particular importance because Korea is one of the largest economy in the Indo-Pacific, and therefore, if we can agree on the measures in order to implement the goals which we set and which we have accepted, I think that would be an important leading by example, and that's the best diplomacy you can have, that you actually walk the talk, and I think that's something which I hope we can achieve. Well, I think I respected more or less my time limit, so thank you for attention. I'm looking forward to questions. And I have just added here a reference. This is the booklet, the paper which we have written, prospect for cooperation with South Korea. You have the link here where you can download the book free of charge, open sources. So please make use of it. And if you are especially interested in the Indo-Pacific, I'm also now the editor of the CSDS policy brief, where we have published 5 backgrounds paper on the Indo-Pacific, which we had prepared in order to support the European External Action Service, and the ES has agreed that we can publish these papers. So have a look if you're interested, and of course the SDS policy brief is always worth a read. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for your very interesting introduction of the book and also the discussion about the issue. Everybody, please turn on your microphone and your camera so that we can see each other. Please do that. Yes, thank you to some of you. As you know, Michael, we have received 2 questions beforehand, and one of them you have answered, but I'd like to call the 2 students who have already submitted the questions, whether or not they have still remaining questions. First of all, Chiara Fiedler, your question was partly answered by the ambassador. And do you have still some more questions about that related questions? Please raise if you have.
Yes, I'm here. So thank you, first of all, Dr. Reiter, for your presentation. And I asked about how the trade policy of the EU has changed towards the Indo-Pacific, comparing past and present. And you already answered that partly. So I wanted to actually follow up with another question, because you mentioned quite a lot of times sustainability and green deals and how reducing carbon emissions, for example, is a shared agenda in the Indo-Pacific and in the EU. So I wanted to ask, do you think that the international trading emission system, like it was introduced in the Kyoto Protocol, could be an incentive in especially East Asia to cooperate or to find shared points of interest? Because from my viewpoint, I think that cooperation, especially between China, Japan, and Korea, is not really easy because of the different development stages of the economy and like ideological issues as well. So I try to think about what could be an incentive for cooperation. So I wanted to ask if the international trading emission system could be relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. I think the thinking, of course, is developing, but the latest issue which is under discussion is whether we should have within the European Union also a border adjustment tax. That's an issue which is hotly debated because there is the fear that this could impact negatively on the economy if only European companies are subject to taxes. So therefore, a border and high standards, and therefore this border tax adjustment mechanism is under discussion. The European Union is aware that it has to be done in a manner which is compatible with the WTO, so with the non-discrimination aspect, and discussions are ongoing. The same applies adjustment for the aviation industry, which I have mentioned, and there, from a European point of view, it's always delicate if you implement measures internally which put a burden on the economy at large for a problem which is a global problem, where we all know that only the European Union, only Korea, we cannot solve the climate change issue. Therefore, the importance is to develop models in order to get international cooperation, to see which incentives can help, because incentives are always better, always much better than any sanctions. And therefore, working with countries like Korea, which Korea is not a small country. Korea is the 10th largest economy in the world. So that's sometimes forgotten, and therefore it also has to shoulder additional or more responsibility in order to bring about solutions to global comments. The cooperation within Asia is, of course, or especially Northeast Asia, could be improved. That's for sure. There is, however, the Trilateral Secretariat, which is headquartered in Seoul, where free trade agreements negotiations are underway. They are very slow, but the Secretariat is also organizing awareness raising events, also in the people-to-people dimension. So I think there is the understanding that more should be done, and I'm always encouraged when I see what we call functional cooperation. So the fine dust, which predates the pandemic or anything, was a major problem in Northeast Asia, and their cooperation between Korea and China and also Japan was established relatively quickly, and also the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, took it up on himself to help create links and foster cooperation. So this functional cooperation, I think, is important, and it also fits very much into the triptychon which I have said with China, partner, competitor, and rival. This is certainly an area where China is a partner, and in the area of climate change, environmental protection, I think China has a lot of interest also, because this is something which Chinese people expect and demand also from their government. So if we work together and show a way, if we lead, I think that's in the interest, as I said, of Korea, and also strengthens the position of the European Union in the whole process, the Paris process.
Thank you very much.
Can you recall me the second question? Which one was that?
There is another question asked by Jung Daram. Are you there, Jung Daram? You have now opportunity to have interaction with Ambassador Reichler. If you are not there, we will skip your question. If you are there, you can have directly raise your question to Ambassador.
Yes, Professor, I'm here. Thank you, Professor, so much for your today's lecture. It was really interesting for me. Actually, my question was about is there any specific topic about climate change issue or energy part of in partnership between Korea and EU? But actually, you already mentioned and described all those things in your lecture. And for me, it was very interesting to find that especially energy issue is also included in the key part of key priority area in the partnerships in Indo-Pacific areas between EU. If possible, can you elaborate more about the energy parts? Which kinds of energy issues or topics are discussed between two regions?
Well, there is an ongoing cooperation between the EU and Korea, which is called the EU-Korea Climate Action, where the target group are local governments and also NGOs who work in the field on these issues, because that's where implementation is important. So I think that's a significant approach in not only talking at the level of government, but also trying to bring civil society representatives together and to have an exchange what and how things have been achieved in Europe and what can be done in Korea. So this is also done via a platform where you can, where there's an automatic translation from Korean into English and from English into Korean in order to facilitate exchanges of civil society. So I think this is a very important element, because you have to work with the people. You need their support. One of the important issues was coal. I have already mentioned it. Korea still has a strong part of its energy which is produced by coal. I have been in that area also together with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and we had a discussion, and there was a lot of awareness and willingness to get out of coal, in Korea because of the CO2 problem. But and that was something one has to do in parallel. You cannot say, I will not do any energy production on coal at home because it is detrimental because of CO2 emissions, but I export coal-fired plants to the rest of the world. So that is not good policy. So that should stop. And we have to have this exchange of also of experience, how to get a good policy mix of different sources of energy. So for wind energy, for example, is an area where there's a lot of European experience, especially with countries which have a long shore, like Denmark and the Netherlands. And they are working with Korean authorities and companies in order to pass on experience and promote wind energy, for example. You can also make use of the sea. The sea is permanently moving, and if you can change this movement into energy, that can add. There are also some rather banal examples that many houses, buildings in Korea are not well isolated. In winter, you heat out of the window, and in summer, you are cooling out of the window. So if you have a better isolation, you can save a tremendous amount of energy, and that's something which is so obvious and so underdeveloped that one has to preach it at each and every occasion, because the impact is huge. We have talked about natural gas. One also has to see how to deal with atomic energy. I mean, that's the discussion you have in Korea, getting out of nuclear, but then you have to phase in other sources of energy. It's also important to have a discussion how to price energy and how to build in an incentive for renewable energy. And there, I think the European Union has a lot of experience already and tested in various models in various member states. So I think this is an area where a mutual learning process can bring a lot. And if then Korea and the European Union together then give an example to other Asian countries, I think that's what we should achieve as joint cooperation, as strategic partners, and that's why I would be in favor of then Indo-Pacific network, to lead by example, which is the best way to lead.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, because of time limitation, there is only one time slot for one question. So let's have the last question. Who is ready for asking? Nobody?
Hello. May I ask a question?
Odile Feldkamp?
Yes.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you very much for the lecture. It was very enlightening. And my question actually pertains to nuclear security on the Korean Peninsula. And I was specifically wondering how the EU is involved in, or whether it is involved in promoting nuclear security on the Korean Peninsula, because I found it interesting that it's not part of the six-party talks, for example.
You are opening Pandora's box. The relationship with North Korea, the denuclearization policy. Well, I'm happy to talk about it, but it's on purpose not covered in my speech, but also in the booklet which we made. Because there is a tendency that EU-Korean relationship is seen too much through the prism of North Korea. So that's something we should avoid. North Korea, the Korean Peninsula, is an important problem, but it's not the only problem. And we want to have a wider relationship between the European Union and Korea. When it comes to North Korea, the European Union is supporting the denuclearization of North Korea. The European Union is implementing international sanctions. The European Union is also implementing autonomous sanctions. But as part of a policy which is called critical engagement, there's also the engagement element, which for my taste could be stronger, helping to bring a solution, about a peaceful solution. We want a diplomatic solution, and therefore we are very strong supporters of the South Korean policy to find a solution with North Korea in a peaceful, diplomatic, and negotiated manner. One of the issues which we always explain is the European Union was leading negotiations for many years with Iran, and these negotiations had the effect that Iran has not gone nuclear so far. There was a blow to this agreement when the United States, which was part of the agreement, left it. Perhaps I should say when President Trump left it, and we will see if they come back. But that was an agreement which worked. What is the relevance for it for the Korean Peninsula? Well, the situation is completely different. But what is interesting and useful is to talk about the method of negotiations, the handwork of diplomacy, which was applied to that situation, and I think that could also have an impact on talks on the Korean Peninsula. To have a multilateral, multi-layered talks where technicians, officials, high officials, politicians talk, and then build up also confidence. So the model, I think, could be studied further. The European Union has participated actively in the past, although it was not part of the six-party talks, as you said. When I started in the European Commission in 1998, one of my first files was KEDO, the Korean Energy Development Organization, which was set up at the time in order to provide energy to North Korea, which is not based on nuclear energy, where the European Union contributed a lot of money, and it was basically thrown out of the window because the system didn't work. And at the time, there was a little bit the attitude that we asked the European Union if we need a paymaster. But that has changed also completely. I think now the situation is quite clear. The European Union is willing to participate, to help, but also to sit at the table when negotiations take place, not for the sake of sitting there, but as I said, to bring in this multilateral experience in diplomacy, where the European Union probably has an outstanding experience. Because if you are already a member of the European Union, amongst the 27 member states, what we are doing on a permanent basis is to talk and to negotiate with amongst us. And then, so it's a permanent negotiating process, and that builds up a lot of experience, which can also be used in international diplomacy, and therefore multilateralism is one of the key concepts of the European Union in international relations.
Thank you, everybody. For me, the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy is a very big scale, new launch of new strategy, and there may be a few other points we have to delve into. However, we have no more time this time. But Ambassador Reiter is and was a very frequent visitor to our university, to our events, and as well as he will continue to be. So as he promised when he comes to Korea in December, you are welcome, most welcome. and let's continue our discussion in December, and also in the coming years. So everybody, thank you very much for your participation. And this event was co-organized by Korea University's two prominent EU-related institutions. One is EU Center of Jean Monnet EU Center of Excellence, and another one is the Nordic Benelux Center headed by Professor Lee Jae-sung. And this program was supported also by GPAS program, which is financially supported by KIEP, Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. So I'd like to thank to all STEM members of these three institutions, and most of all, Dr. Michael Leiterer, a close friend of mine, and also very close friend of Korea and Korea University. Why don't we give him big hands? Richard, see you soon again. And everybody, see you soon again in this event.